is part of what you do.
And now we will welcome our guest. Joining us today is Karen Muñoz, author of the article Stress in Law, How Does Lawyer Unwellness Begin and What Are Its Roots, that was published in the Trial Lawyers Journal #2 that came out last year. Karen is a passionate advocate for mental health and wellness in the legal profession and soon-to-be therapist, a certified yoga instructor and founder of Roaring Grace Wellness. She co-chairs the Well-Being and Mindfulness Committee of the Chicago Bar Association and serves on the board of Mindfulness and Law Society, reflecting her dedication to supporting mental health of her peers. Thanks for joining us and contributing to TLJ again.
I am so happy to be having this conversation and to be part of this. And what you're doing, I think, is so laudable, because I think having this conversation is what starts to, at least in people's minds, say, it's okay. This is a normal conversation to be having, right?
Yes, it is okay. And as a thank you to Karen for her time today, Cloudlex and TLJ is going to make a small donation to Soul Harbor Ranch. They are based in Chicago, one of TLJ's animal advocates and nonprofits we featured in TLJ #3. Soul Harbor Ranch's mission is to enrich lives by promoting the unconditional love and healing of the human-animal bond while advocating for animal therapy standards of excellence. So Karen, thanks again for your time today, and we'll be making a small donation to them.
And I plug them really quick?
Yes, please.
Because we just finalized plans for anyone who's local here in Chicago or who wants to travel to Chicago. The Chicago Bar Association is launching another animal therapy seminar in person at the Chicago Bar Association on July 21st at noon. It coincides with the National Association of Women Lawyers being here, as well as the ABA conference.
Okay,
and so
cool.
we hope to have a really good turnout. And we'll have animals again, hopefully 2 miniature horses and 2 golden retrievers who come and share space with the attorneys and legal professionals.
Okay, so if anyone's going to ABA Tech Show, make sure you carve some time out there. So now I'm going to pull up her article. We'll take a look at it real quick. Going to kind of read a passage, and then Karen, we're going to chat about it. Kind of like the starting point and why law school. You say, studies show that students entering law school are really no different than the general population when it comes to mental health and substance abuse. But somewhere in the storied halls of knowledge, students begin to experience a change, which in many cases creates a negative impact moving forward through school and into their careers. The framing is striking, that law students are no different than the general population when they arrive. And I'm sure MBA school and medical school is stressful, but what is it about law school that kind of changes these students? What is the environment that is doing to these people?
So the lawyer in me still says, I will preface this with, these are generalizations, right? We make these extrapolations from what the numbers show, but also coming from my own experience. One of the major differences is if you think about medical school, for example, yes, very stressful. You are dealing with people's lives, their health. The most important thing to someone is their well-being, right? Whether that's physical, mental, emotional, but medical school is tough. It is different than law school and different than being an attorney in that I think of this as an ER doctor who is saving someone's life who came in maybe with a gunshot wound. They have a team of support that's there, and their mission, number one, first and foremost, is to make sure that this patient gets the best medical treatment that they can give them so that they hopefully survive their injury. Now imagine if you were thinking about this from a legal context, there's another ER team in this environment where their whole job is to kind of pick apart the work that this other team A, we'll call them, is doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
How stressful would that be? You're there to try to save someone's life. Same thing, let's just say a firefighting team. They're there to do one thing, right? There's not another team in place trying to undo the work that they're doing, and that's very stressful to begin with. In law, there is, for the most part. If you're in litigation, if you're in work in which you have an adversarial counterpart, the name of the game is really to pick apart the person's legal strategy or their case. And we do this through mechanisms like motions to dismiss, motions for summary judgment, and the ultimate mechanism, which is a trial by jury. So think of the extra layer of stress that maybe someone in business school or someone who is in the business of business won't have, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not, all of it's competitive. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's stress there. But there's this extra step, right? Where there's this adversarial component in a space where humans aren't meant to be in conflict all of the time. Yes, losing a patient in the ER, that's painful, right? That's your job, is to help people survive things like that, or to put out fires so that there's the least amount of damage done, right? And you have to sit and process that. There's extra in the law, in that competitive space, and that nature where conflict is part of what you do every day. And that conflict starts very early on, whether it's internal, whether it's external, and it's usually a combination of both.
I see some lawyers who completely dismiss mental health in law, and I'm going to chat about this again later. But is there a particular type of student, personality, background, or their motivation who's more vulnerable to this when they actually start in going into law school, and kind of this starts building ultimately that will go throughout their career unless they kind of address it?
Yes. And there's a couple factors I'll address. One is, if you think about your typical general law student, for example, I was 22 years old when I started law school. Most people are in that age group where maybe they take a year off between college and their professional studies, but most of us go straight from college into their professional academic careers, right? What we know from a neurological perspective, from a developmental perspective, is that your brain, an adult human brain, does not stop forming. And I mean that the cognitive, the prefrontal cortex, so the part of the brain that thinks for us, is not fully formed by the time most of us will start law school, especially for men. For men, we know that it takes a little bit longer than for women to fully develop that area of the brain. So think about someone whose brain isn't fully developed yet. They don't have all of the skills and tool sets that they will need in order to navigate these very difficult systems that are in place, and whether that's navigating a curve system, whether that's navigating things like landing clerkships, jobs, associateships, like getting on law review, right? So that's one thing. One thing that is a factor that I think plays a role. The second factor is what we now know through decades and decades of studies is external motivations and internal motivations play a very big role in the outcome of how you will feel about the work that you are doing. So, for example, if you go, I ask students sometimes, like, why are you thinking about going to law school, or why are you in law school? And I have heard things from, I'm really tired of seeing the oppression and the discrimination that people in that look like me have to face because of some traits like their color, their skin, or their gender, right? And I want to be part of a place in which I can make that better for others.
Yeah.
Okay, that's an internal motivator, right? That person's going to experience stress, but not in the same way if someone tells you, I want to make a lot of money and I want to live in a really nice house and drive a really cool car. And I think big law is for me.
Yes.
There's different tools that are available for people who are internally motivated, because when you have internal motivation, and we know this from therapeutic modalities like logotherapy, which is an existential philosophical, what is the purpose of life? Why am I here? How do I make meaning? That people who have that ability to stake their what they're doing for a living in something much bigger than themselves, they will navigate things generally in a way that's more healthy than someone who, let's just say, does attain all of these external metrics of success. They're outside of us. We have no control over it. You can lose your job, right?
Yeah.
That pays very well. You can go through a divorce because you didn't spend any time really cultivating relationships that were meaningful to you because you put these external goalposts, right? And so there's a lack of control or locus of control when we're thinking about what it drives us. One something I can control, which is how I feel about the work that I'm doing. What am I connected to? Why do I get up every day? Versus something that is outside of us that can be taken at any time. And it's a really interesting way of looking at the world. And one of the therapeutic modalities is logotherapy. The father of this is Viktor Frankl. If you haven't anyone out there read the book, Man's Search for Meaning, it's very short but powerful. He's a Holocaust survivor who really this type of framework came into being while he was in a concentration camp and lost most of his family.
To go back to your article, you just mentioned the curve system, and you write, one of the key challenges law students face is maintaining their mental health is the lack of control they experience in their burgeoning law school careers. Many schools still rely on grading curves where students' performance is measured against their peers rather than on individual merit. This system can create a scarcity mentality and becomes a breeding ground for anxiety and stress. I personally have never thought about this through the mental health lens, the grading curve as a structural stressor. Most people just accept it as part of law school, but you're saying it's the architecture of the system itself is part of the problem. Can you walk us through the psychology of the curve and how does being evaluated relative to your peers rather than your own work? Can you talk a little bit about that and how that leads to that anxiety and stress?
Well, let's go back to that locus of control. What someone in law school is experiencing, specifically first semester, right? When everything is brand new, you have no idea what's going on. The system is very different from what you went through in college, where it is different, right? Like it is less competitive, it is more collaborative, it is a space where people are trying out new ideas, learning things for the first time. This is that plus the fact that you're judged against others for the foundational classes. And I'm not saying this happens in every single law school. I think some law schools have tried to modulate or account for, this anxiety that it produces in students, because the locus of control is what really makes the difference in terms of feeling, do I have control over my life, right? Meaning the effort that I'm putting into something, am I going to be accountable for the outcome? And for many of these grades and these classes, you're not, because it doesn't matter how much effort you put into it. It's all relative, right?
Yeah.
And so there are people who have been at the top of their class throughout college. There are people who are strivers, very disciplined. They study really hard. If you've got a whole classroom full of those types of folks, you have no control over where you're going to land, right? It's very subjective in a way, because there is no, really metric of, okay, if you do these things, then you'll get this grade, right? Which is what most grading does, right? It's judged on its own. But you are not judged on your own for a lot of these classes. And again, things are changing, and this is not for every single class throughout all of law school, but you're brand new to a system. You're coming, most of the people have done very well throughout their entire academic careers. And now you're thrown into a system where everyone's really smart. Everyone's competitive because it's law school, and people have heard, what you need to do to succeed. And it's these external things, getting in law review, moot court, not learning just for the sake of learning, right? Which is its own reward. So yeah, I mean, the less control that you feel you have over your life, the more anxiety that's going to produce, right? And it's like, no matter how much effort I put towards something, and no matter how smart I know that I am, it doesn't matter, because I'm being not judged on my own individual work. I'm being judged on how well everybody else did or how poorly everyone else did. And how would that make anybody feel? I don't want my classmates to do worse than me so that I can get a good grade. And I don't want to be the one that did the worst so that others got a good grade. I want to be judged and know that the effort I put in means something. And so that's one of the biggest things, is this lack of autonomy, right? And that in and of itself creates this cycle of anxiety, like how much studying is too much. We know that you can overstudy, you can over prepare, and people do. But that doesn't mean that you're retaining all the information that you need to in order to do well.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen and interviewed some trial lawyers, and they've mentioned and talked about how they don't over prepare as much anymore and that it's unnecessary. But you also mentioned something about how the curve doesn't apply to everybody, not all law schools. Do you know if some of the law schools are doing it differently, and what are they doing, and does that produce different outcomes?
I couldn't give you the specific schools doing it. I know just through basic research that when we talk about school law student wellness, that there are other ways to do it, right? It's like kind of the difference between like your normal elementary school and a Montessori, right? There's
Right.
people are always thinking of ways to do things in a way that benefits mental health and benefits the success rate of people. The thing with law schools is that for a very, very long time, it was this system that starts from the top of the competitiveness, right? We have our top 10, we have the rankings, we've started to get away from that, but that's been in the last maybe 2 or 3 years where rankings have become, okay, we're not going to pay attention to those. Also, we're moving away from the rote memorization application of the bar exam into a new generation, really literally called like the next gen bar exam,
Hmm.
where students will be tested more on the application of skills, practical skills that they have learned. And that's one of the classes I teach at the law school is learning to write for the practice of law and then applying those skill sets to the actual bar exam portion where that's what you do. It's a closed universe exam, right? So people have all the tools that they need in order to write something in 90 minutes. That's very different than most of the other parts of the bar exam, which are more so based on remembering large sums of information and then applying it right under this time constraints. There's still time constraints to everything, but it is shifting more into a skills based type of environment versus learning lots of information in a really short period of time and then trying to cohesively put it together in order to satisfy the bar passage rate, right? And the bar passage rate is a big thing that drives to like where people
Hmm.
decide to apply and spend their dollars when they go to law school. So yes, we do know that learning is much more enjoyable and much more palatable when we have ways to know that what we're putting in is being reflected in a way that makes sense and is applied fairly towards all the students, right? So rubrics, right? Going into and knowing exactly what you need to do in order to gain X amount. And then having a professor be able to explain, like, here's where you didn't meet the rubric, right? It's not subjective. It's literally like, did you hit this or not? And that also gives you an opportunity to say, okay, I see where my weakness is, right? And for a lot of things I remember in law school at the very beginning, you just got a grade. That was it. Like you got a B, and that's what you got. And there was no like going back and trying to figure out, well, where did I not do so well? What part of this? Why did I get this B? And that's how it's been throughout my entire master's program. Is you get a rubric, you know what the rubric is, you know how you need to structure your work, and you can ask questions, right? And you can talk to the professors, and you see where you did well and where you didn't. That creates a lot of autonomy for you to say, I'm going to do things differently the next time. When you're navigating the waters and you don't even know why you got what you got, right? You might have gotten the best grade in the class. You have no idea why.
Yeah. The professional persona, you wrote, law students begin by modeling those already in the profession and creating a professional persona that aligns with societal expectations of what a lawyer should be. Many of the traits that serve a lawyer well, such as analytical skills and heavy reliance on logic, can lead to a suppression of emotional awareness. To fit the mold, students may dampen their emotions, presenting an image to the world that is in line with the public's perception of a legal professional. For the lawyers in this virtual room, how would they know if they're in that battle right now?
That's a really big question because so much of this work depends on awareness, and awareness starts with reflection. So I would start by asking the people watching this or maybe questioning. Questioning is really good. It's taking a very deep look inside and asking, am I in alignment externally when I present my professional self to the world with who I truly am inside? And most of the time, we're not. And that's all humans because, we do have a public facing persona. You don't go around picking your nose or like, doing things that maybe if no one was watching you would do. I'm not admitting to picking my nose, but I'm saying like there's things that we're like, we don't show the world about who we are. So all of us do it to a certain extent, but if you've ever talked to a lawyer who's been in the profession a long time, they have a different way of existing. They have a different way of talking. And I think it's because we observe others in our environment and then we adapt to that. And we subconsciously or even consciously might be told, this is what the mold of an attorney is. This is how one speaks. This is how one dresses. In a culture now where, hey, AI can do your job, and if you want to ask it a legal question, we're thinking more about what is an authentic human being? Why am I hiring someone? Are they relatable to me? Right. And I think it's a strength to have these human qualities, a strength to be who you are, to use all of your experience to help guide other people. That is part of the counseling part of being an attorney. But so many of us have been trained to, put that to the side and focus solely on the professional analytical component, which sometimes takes on also this added layer of adversarial, which means aggressive, which means not civil, to gain advantages in litigation. Now, that's not everyone, right? Again, this
Yeah.
is all like these are generalizations, but I think the work really starts with saying, who am I as an attorney? And more importantly, who do I want to be? And then doing your work to figure that out, right? That it's a very individualized journey of self questioning and turning that Socratic method that we're so familiar with inward, right? No one can do the work for you. You're not going to be able to go to a coach, which I know lawyers who will say, I'm going to a coach and they're going to help me. Yeah, they can help you, but you still have to do the work. You have
Yeah.
to really take a deep look inside to question continuously, right? This is not a one time and done kind of thing. This is I how am I today, right? Did I live up to what I wanted to do in this deposition, in this hearing, in that phone call with that client, in my initial meeting with, a potential new client? Did I do the best I could, right? It's a lot of reflective and hard work, right? Because most of us don't really want to do that because we don't really like to see what's underneath.
Is emotional suppression sometimes genuinely adaptive in the courtroom? And if so, how do lawyers know when to turn it off?
So some of the best trialers I have ever seen in action, Jerry Spence, for example.
Yeah.
No, they use their emotion. Yeah, they use their emotional part of who they are, right, to advocate. That's a skill set, right? He didn't wake up one day and he trains people, right?
Yes.
There's a whole system in place for people who want to get in touch with using their emotions to their advantage in a way that advocates effectively for people, right? Part of what they do at the camp is a really old modality called psychodrama.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard work. It is not easy, right? There's a reason this is a 3 week intensive, type of training, because we have to almost deprogram ourselves to come back into who we are as human beings. And so, no, I think there's lots of ways to answer that question, right? So if you're talking about emotional suppression in a way of emotional regulation, which is a whole different thing, then yes, as a professional, you should not have outbursts in a courtroom. You should not yell at other people. You should not be uncivil. That's all part of being an emotionally regulated person. Emotional suppression is something different, right? It is not using what we have, right? Both our emotional and mental skills, because we think only it's the mental or cognitive skills that we're going to win the day. And I can tell you, and you know this, that emotion is what drives trials.
Mm-hmm.
You have to make the jury care about what you're advocating for. I've seen people with really good cases as plaintiffs' lawyers lose them because they didn't bring it. I've seen corporation defendant attorneys win because they humanize their clients. They
Mm-hmm.
were likable, right? It's not saying it's a popularity contest or a personality contest, but to a certain extent, it's who's a better storyteller. And you cannot tell a good story without having emotion behind it. Why
Yeah.
should I care? It's the psychology of everything, right? Why should I buy your product?
Right. What's your why? I talk to, I do the podcast Celebrating Justice, and a lot of trial lawyers tell me that they always tried to model themselves after people they saw or the books they read, and that they really didn't find success until they abandoned that idea of being someone else's persona or
Yeah.
following exactly what they did, and that it didn't happen until they actually started being more true to themselves. And I think, letting that emotional suppression go. Let's talk about imposter syndrome. Many incoming lawyers describe a feeling of imposter syndrome or feeling inadequately prepared for the practice of law. Having conquered law school, many lawyers are unprepared for the sometimes sobering reality of practice. Naturally, many reach for the coping mechanisms that they used in law school, such as excessive drinking or substance use, to help manage the anxiety and feelings of overwhelm that can occur. This is when it gets interesting to me, because you're describing the pipeline now from law school into the practice of law, young lawyers growing up into the law firm and in the business, for lack of a better term. Why is it that imposter syndrome is so pervasive in law specifically? Is it about the nature of the work, the culture, the law firm, how law school
All of it.
prepares you, all of it?
All of it generalizations, right? Because there are some there's some people that come out of law school and they find environments in which their strengths will be nurtured, and
Right,
they're going to be successful because there's resources for them, right? Whether that's having a mentor that they can look up to, but because that mentor has already done their own internal work and they're really a really good model, right? Some of the mistakes young career lawyers will make, and it's not a mistake that they're aware of, because we model the people that we admire or we think that we should be like, right? So we set ourselves up for failure, because part of being human is being your own human. Part of being human is being unique and figuring out what is it about you that makes you you, right? Not emulating someone else, not trying to fit into this box, what it means to be an attorney. But we do that, right? Because we don't know any better. If we can't do any better until we do know better, and you don't know any better until you usually hit some sort of crisis moment in life that makes you kind of come face to face with your shadow, or the darkness that might be following you in your career. So imposter syndrome is very prevalent in law, because think about this again. You've gone through a system with really intelligent people, really good at doing things with their brain, right? It's a room full of like really like smarties.
yeah,
Then you go into a bigger, like, right, you're in a pond, the law school little it's its own little cosmo environment. But now you're set out to the world. So you're in this now giant ocean, right? And everyone's really smart. And the difference between you and the people who you perceive to be really smart is the experience that they've had in that environment. So think about it, right? You're basically like a freshman, or you're a rookie who has the same training as everyone else. They all went to law school, they all passed this bar, but you don't have the experience, right? And in your mind, because you're used to have been in a space where intelligence is rewarded, you equate that with something being something wrong with you. And the thing I wish I knew back then was, of course, you don't know anything in terms of what you think you should be doing or what you should be doing. You've never done this before, right? Why would you expect it to be any differently? Now I know that, right? While going into my own internship and my own educational training to become a therapist, the less you know, the better, right? Then it means I'm able to learn and apply what fits and what doesn't, and grow as a person and grow as a therapist, so that I'm doing the work to help others, right? There's a lot of rigidity that comes with being a law student that, of course, translates, of course, you're not going to be rigid and then flexible overnight. So we just carry those traits with us. And it's intimidating to go into a courtroom where people have been practicing 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and they know what they're doing.
yeah.
But they didn't know what they were doing the first day, month, year, and no one tells you that, right? It's like, oh, well, they must have just got, they were born into the career, and they know what they're doing right away. Like, that's just not how being a beginner in anything works. And so your ego just becomes very wounded, right? And so you just kind of pretend that you know what you're doing until eventually you figure it out. Some of us, it takes longer, but that's not necessarily the best way to learn, right? It's being open and making the mistakes that's going to help you grow.
Frank says, I've been a trial attorney for 44 years. The first 6 months of law school were the most stressful. And then the second term there was the realization that if you are in the law school, you deserve to be here. The nature of practicing law places the stress of being perfect. Practicing became easier when I realized there is only one me, and that's unique enough. And you also mentioned in your article that lawyers in the first 15 years of practice experience these high rates of drinking problems. And I think is that kind of a little bit what Frank is referring to, and also this analogy of going from the pool into the ocean or the minor leagues into the majors.
That was my experience. That's what the research shows. Drinking tends to level off the longer you've been in the practice. There has been some research that shows in the last several years, with this little thing called the pandemic that occurred, where drinking rates shot back up across the board. They've started to level down, but what was surprising is that some lawyers who had been practicing much longer were impacted, especially women. And that's across the board, not just in law, but women tended to start, because if you think about it, a lot of women are caregivers in that age group. They have elderly parents, they have younger children that they're caring for, and they're attorneys. So how do we adapt to the environment that's very stressful, very easy and very normative to drink, right? Until it becomes something you can't control, which for a lot of us, that's what ends up happening, because it is a very easy way to distress, but over time it becomes its own hellhole, right? And we can have a whole discussion about lawyers in recovery and
Right.
addiction. But the thing about, I think what's important to also know is, for a lot of students who are first gen, for example, who are not in the mainstream, who's maybe never their family, they don't know anybody who's been in law. They
Mm-hmm.
might be LGBTQ, coming from a marginalized background. They look around and they don't see anyone that looks like them, either teaching at the school or in their classrooms. And it's changed a lot since, I was in school, and I'm sure, 30, 40, 50 years ago. But it can feel isolating. So there's this extra layer, right, of who gets to have this conversation and say, yeah, I made it on the other side, and I figured all this out, which is great, versus people who just kind of end up leaving because it just becomes overwhelming. And not because they're not cut out for it, or they're not smart, or they're not capable, but it's these external things like bullying, for example. In Illinois, we did a survey, I want to say in 2024. 6,000 lawyers were surveyed. It's the first type of bullying survey in the United States for lawyers. And 1 in 4 answered that they had been on the receiving end of bullying. And not things like, micro insults or microaggressions, like big things like staplers being thrown at people, the things that you wouldn't imagine like professionals doing to one another. And what was not, I mean, I wouldn't say it's surprising, but marginalized women, people of color, people coming from, minority groups, you tended to be on the receiving end more so than other groups. So there's this extra layer for people, who don't or not in the mainstream, that they also have to you take into account when it comes to why mental health is impacted in different ways for different people.
Karen, your article ends with the call to awareness that when we know better, we do better. So let's talk about the doing better part. And I want to get practical for the lawyers and firm leaders in this virtual room. If a managing partner is watching this right now and genuinely want to build a healthier culture, what are the first 3 things that you would tell them?
What I tell most people with anything, take a hard look at where you're at, right? Know your own weak spots, because inadvertently a lot of us have done, I talked to a lawyer yesterday who practiced for 40 years and retired, and said, I wish I could apologize to the associates
Hmm.
who I had working for me because I was miserable to them. I just didn't know better. I thought that's the way that you were supposed to be. You're supposed to be hard, right? And so having the ability to reflect and say, I know I'm trying to help them, but is this a way that they're understanding what I'm trying to put down, right? Because communication is such an important piece of guiding the next generation into doing better, into being able to be reflective about the work that they're doing. So be first looking at yourself, what am I bringing to the table? Can I do better? What do I want? What is my legacy here? Like what am I trying to impart, right? The second thing I would say is, really taking the time to understand the generational differences.
Hmm.
I do a lot of work around this because generationally right now we have about five different generations in the workplace, a very small minority, what we call the generation before the baby boomers, which were the silent generation. Not many of them left, but there's you still know lawyers, I do, that are practicing
Yeah.
in their 80s, even
Yeah.
close, we had Supreme Court judges that were close to 90, all the way to Gen Z. Now think about the differences in terms of what someone who is 90 years old has lived.
Yeah.
So really also taking stock from a generational perspective. What is my bias? What is my stereotype? What am I bringing in terms of what I think about certain generations? Because we all have these preconceived notions. And really taking the time to kind of reach across that aisle and get to know one another. And I would say this the same thing. It's like a reverse mentorship. Lots of Gen Z students and young lawyers have preconceived notions about what it is to be a baby boomer and what they don't understand, or Gen Xers. But I think it's really kind of doing the work generationally to understand, and then not only stopping there, but then looking to see what strengths, what can I learn from this person? Both ways, right?
Yeah.
And learning to work together to put your strengths to an advantage to your clients, to the work you're doing. And the third thing I would say is, understanding the importance of mentorship outside of, really kind of taking a hard look at yourself and also trying to understand the generational biases you might be bringing. And then understanding the importance of really making yourself a good model, right? And doing those two things and being known as someone that is open and flexible. Um, that's modeling, right? It's when you have a mental health issue going on, or you just need a day, taking it, right? Not don't be a martyr and stay in your office for 12 hours thinking that that's what the people underneath you need to see. What they need to see is a human being who, when they're going through stuff, there's a death in the family, you're having a baby, you're going to attend to what's important, right? And then showing them how you balance all of that while still maintaining your ethical responsibilities to your clients, right? Delegating, which is
Yeah.
really, really hard, was very hard for me. It still kind of is. I'm still deprogramming a lot of the things that were like really rigid about me. And that's still one of them, is this drive for everything to be the way that you need it to be when you need it to be. So letting go of a lot of these attachments of what should it be.
Or maybe like getting away from this idea of the persona that you think you should have and have been
Yeah.
carrying for so long. I mentioned it earlier, and I wanted to ask you because I see some trial lawyers, LinkedIn, I'm specifically looking at you and a lot of the personal injury attorneys I follow, who kind of completely dismiss this idea of mental health in law. They think it's kind of like a waste and overblown and like, I don't want to see some lawyer crying about, what the stress that they're in. You don't know real stress. What do you kind of say to the lawyer who listens to all of this, might know that it applies to them, but really, don't really buy into this and, maybe just want to shove it down into a box and kind of, I guess, be that persona of, you didn't serve, in the military, so you really don't know about true stress.
It's going back to what I said, right? It's okay. So, for example, if I have a young lawyer coming to me and saying, in the work that I do, I have a partner that I work for who just basically said to me, like, this mental health stuff is BS, and I don't want to see you boo-hooing about, just go to court and do your job, right? And they're devastated. They don't they've never been talked to that way. They didn't come up in an era in which like your feelings weren't at least somewhat acknowledged or validated, right? I okay, this may not be a safe person for you to disclose what you're going through, so find another support system, one. But two, it says more about them than it does about the person who's on the receiving end, right? So what I would say to someone who's very rigid in this, and I've had people say, I don't experience stress. I don't know what the big deal is. That says more about you than it does about anything else, right? It's your own resistance to taking that deep, hard look. And at the end of the day, it really only harms you, right? And also it harms by proxy everyone around you because no one feels safe around you. No, I'm not saying that you as a professional should go to work and cry about things and expect to be validated all of the time either, right? There's a time and space and place for everything, right? That's why therapists exist and support groups, etc. But to completely dismiss someone's humanity when they really are experiencing something like going to a deposition and having opposing counsel pull every, objection on you, that's you just don't have the experience to say, like, hold on a second, let's look at these rules. You know what I mean? Like, I wish I could go back and say, hold on, and defend myself, who was 25 years old sitting in a deposition with someone who was 60 years old, who had been through all of it, right? I didn't have the ability to advocate for myself. The way I go back now and think about it is I would have been like, well, let's go back to the training that we've all received. What does this rule actually say? Maybe I'll use some tools like let's call the judge and pause this deposition, right? I think it's again doing that work of looking inside and asking yourself, where is this coming from? Perhaps their parents also shared these same type of views. Perhaps that they had a very traumatic, or they were experienced as a young lawyer, or they've been, like, example, someone who's been in the military. There's
Yeah.
trauma history there, right? It's work that they need to do internally. It has nothing to do with the person on the receiving end. It is their way of expressing something that they're projecting onto others. And again, no one wants to be around that kind of person.
Yeah.
It's not healthy to suppress all of that. The more you protest, right, the more that there's there for you as the person protesting to look into. And I don't mean this to sound hard or anything. It's just that it's a common complaint. And it's kind of like, well, there's a lot going on there, right? That you are trying to dismiss and make it about someone else's experience when it's really about yours.
Yeah. We're running out of time, so I'm going to go through a rapid fire round. Okay, so
Okay.
short answers, no wrong answers. Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
What's the one thing law schools could do tomorrow to reduce student stress?
I think talking about and normalizing stress.
The conversation managing partners most need to have that they're avoiding.
Constructive criticism, I think, and feedback, because it's very useful to help people grow as attorneys. But I think that a lot of us don't want to either hurt someone's feelings, so we don't learn how to communicate. So communication is big for me.
The best thing a trial lawyer can do right now for their own well-being that costs nothing.
Take a big breath.
The biggest myth about lawyer mental health.
That lawyers don't have feelings.
And finally, when you hear a lawyer say, I'm fine, I can handle it, what are you actually thinking?
Well, anytime someone tells me they're fine, that's a non-answer to me.
Yeah.
What does fine mean, right? As a lawyer, I'm like, well, define fine, And I think if you look at other countries where well-being and health is really high, like high quality of life, they don't answer questions like, how are you doing with fine? They will tell you honestly how they're feeling because it's normalized.
Yes.
Fine is a non-answer. Fine is a nothing burger.
Well, thank you so much, Karen, and to everyone who joined us today. This isn't an easy conversation necessarily, but the fact that you showed up, it matters. Once again, Karen's article, Stress in Law, is in TLJ number 2. Karen, thank you so much again for contributing to
Thank you.
TLJ. And we'll see you guys next time. Thanks again.